Having just finished S.M. Stirling's The Sky People, I shall review it forthwith. Forthwith is a good word. Doesn't get used often enough. Anyway, S.M. Stirling, a big name in science fiction. I was about 90% certain that I have read something by Stirling before, but whatever it was, I didn't save it on Goodreads and I didn't review it on Goodreads, and it doesn't seem to be on the sci-fi shelf, so I've got no memory of what or when it was. So maybe I haven't read him before. There's a lot of Stirling out there. You see it in the second-hand shops all the time, and The Sky People came, I'm pretty sure, from a Lifeline book fest where I grabbed a certain amount of science fiction on speculation because it's cheap and I can. And this book, this in particular, has sat on my to-read shelf for, I'm going to say, a couple of years now. Probably a couple of years. I picked it up a few times and I started reading it, but I never got very far. And this time I picked it up and I was kind of determined. It was the perfect foil. I just finished Brian Aldiss's Hot House, which was so beautifully written. I needed a complete change of palette in terms of what I was reading. I either had to go for something really gorgeous, like literature type gorgeous, or I needed to go for something completely different. And this was indeed completely different. It's a good book, and it is well written, it's well edited, well proofed, a thing that cannot be too highly emphasized in these days of self-published things that no one apparently read before it went to publishing. The construction of the story kind of reminded me of the elaborate constructions that J.R.R. Martin does, and when I checked I found that Martin is mentioned in the acknowledgements and apparently wrote the number 3 in the Lords of Creation series, this being number 1 in the Lords of Creation series. And how on earth does that work? Is it fanfic? If J.R.R. Martin writes it for Stirling, whose series it originally was? Anyway, apparently it's true. The internet told me so. It must be true. So with The Sky People, like the Martin's work, one pictures the author's study or war room for Lords of Creation as having a huge wall with characters and locations and interconnected bits and pieces and strings running between them and timelines. Because there are a lot of point of views. At least in the beginning there's a lot of point of views. They swap less. In terms of reading experience, this book felt like 3 different books almost. Out of 300 odd pages, the first 150 were world building. And I was not wild about it. The writing style was one I'm not in love with. I didn't expect to be in love with it, but I was less in love with it even than I thought I was going to be. It's like one speed dating rather than a few dinner dates. I don't know. It bounces around all over the place, but more than that, the actual writing, which, don't get me wrong, it's very good, it's very professional, workmanlike, proficient. I just didn't find it hugely engaging. And the characters certainly weren't engaging. They were largely generic, though there was enough distinction to the characters you could tell them apart in the text. So the first 150 odd pages out of 300 odd pages were world building. And the world building is fascinating. In case you haven't heard of it, it's set on Venus in the 1980s, when humanity first made it to Venus in the 1960s. And there's, among the other point of views, there's a whole heap of little inserts from a fake encyclopedia which tells you about man's history, and sometimes it's actually true and sometimes it isn't true, and it all blends together to give you an image of the world powers that got into space and got onto Venus. So there's a Eastern Bloc that sounds like it was the USSR, but then it joined a few Eastern Bloc European countries, including Lithuania, several others. And then you have China joined in, so now there's more Chinese than Russians almost. That's your East Bloc. Then you've got the American block, which encompasses Europe as well. There's strange little encyclopedia readings suggesting that Western Europe is trying to create their own block, but at the moment they're still kind of wound in with the Americans. And there's a lot of odd things in those little dictionary entries. It's like, apparently in Stirling's universe, well, he lives in America, so I guess this makes sense, all the British colonial powers have banded together and rejected the metric system. So we've got pounds in here and other miles and other shit that I don't understand. But there's other ones, like Kennedy didn't get shot, went in for a second term of service. The political systems are a little bit different. I didn't love all these Encyclopedia Britannica type entries, but I didn't love it, and I didn't love the point of views. In fact, the first 150 pages were a lot of me not loving it. The world building is fascinating. This Venus is lush, rich, completely unlike anything we know, which leads me to something. Because I wasn't enjoying the first bit so much, and my interest kept drifting from the narrative, I reread another book in the same time as The Sky People, and it ended up being funny or ironic or convergent or something. I reread the illustrated Roger Zelazny, in which, in his introduction to Rose for Ecclesiastes, says that by the time he was writing in the 60s, the space program had invalidated the notion of life on Mars and Venus, and he was almost too late to write about it. So he did write about it in the Rose for Ecclesiastic and the lamps of his face, the doors of his mouth. The lamps of his mouth, the doors of his face. One of those ones. Okay, I always get that one wrong. But anyway, Zelazny was obviously too fast to discount the level of interest in Venus and Mars, because here we have Stirling writing in 2007 about this hypothetical world back in the 1980s where people were on Venus and Mars, which are both lush, rich planets. Though he's got an excellent explanation for how that happened. Okay, so there's cute retrofitting of how the 80s worked in order to make all of this fit together. The French attempt to get the EU up and running, the notations in the encyclopedia are very disparaging, which is just funny from a 2007 or 2024 point of view. What else? The descriptions of the airship and cameras and a few other things which are trying to be based on 80s tech are funny and entertaining. The combination of bioscience and geology and all the other sciences in this make it quite a respectable modern science fiction. It isn't too high on physics, so there's some physics, some astronomy, plenty of biology, zoology, paleontology, geology, all the ologies are here, hence science fiction. So after about page 150, we get into the actual plot, which is when our characters, Mark, who is kind of interchangeable main hero, Cynthia, and another guy, one of whom is quite obviously got another narrative. Is it spoiler to say that he's kind of a spy? It can't be a spoiler. I mean, we all sort of spotted it the second he landed off the aircraft. Anyway, they're all on this mission to save East Block shuttle that came down. And that's when the real story begins. So it really begins 150 pages into a 300 and something book. And after that, it's really exciting. I loved their journey. I loved all the twists, the turns. I loved how finally the different POVs converged, because you've got the Cloud Mountain people who are natives who are fighting Neanderthals, or like Neanderthals. And then you've got Earthmen coming into the crew, the Sky people. And it all comes together really beautifully. And the last, I don't know, couple of dozen pages, the great crescendo of the fight are amazing. Loved that. So by page 200, I wasn't sure I was ever going to pick up another Stirling. Having sat through it all and read to the end, I'm pretty sure I am. I'm not going to dive into it, though. There's a tiny little epilogue at the end, which is kind of tells you what maybe happened to one of the people, one of the secondary characters in the book, but it's also very much a beg to read on to the second book, which is In the Courts of the Crimson Kings, and there's even a preview here at the and in case you weren't inclined to dive right in, I'm not inclined to dive right in. I liked it, but I didn't love it. I loved the way all the different eras of Earth, so you've got dinosaurs and you've got a whole heap of fascinating stuff happening at once. Really loved that combination. Edgar Rice Burroughs, if he'd lived to read this book, would have enjoyed it as well, I think, because it had that sort of lush fantasy, fantasy jungly feel to it. I didn't always love Stirling's writing. He's obviously writing from a different mythos. I don't always understand what he's on about. Like on page 22. On 22, it was annoying as hell, and it meant that the single men among the old bulls had a built-in advantage. I don't get it. There's no way I can Google what old bulls is meant to mean. I had to read it 3 or 4 times, and I think I get what he's saying, kind of, that because there's disproportionate number of men to women, some of the guys get more of an advantage. Old bulls sound kind of weird. Don't know what your point you were making there. Don't know that I like it. I would like it very much if I did understand it. He uses other words that he may have invented for the purpose. I won't worry about them too much. In fact, all the small things that niggled me about the first 150 odd pages stopped mattering very much once we got, well, okay, come on, hop, come on. It stopped bothering me once the actual plot started. The world building, great, but not really enough on its own to keep me engaged. There's a whole heap of cool things. Our leading man, Mark, who's apparently from some part of America that I don't recognize and has an excellent accent that is meant to be Cajun, I think. So that means that he starts, every single second time he starts with, there is the sentence with may. I think that's meant to be from my oui in French. Dunno, don't get it. It's a useful telegraph, but you usually knew it was him anyway. He domesticates a direwolf type dog, so I've got a pet dog throughout, which was fun. I was horrified to hear that Earth learnt nothing from all the mistakes in Australia and New Zealand. In Stirling's version, they took cats to Venus because that worked so well with Australian fauna and even better with New Zealand. But, you know, he's American, so perhaps he hasn't heard of Australia and New Zealand. You never know. He certainly doesn't feature them. It's America versus Russia all over again. But, you know, it's fun. It's one of only 2 in a series. I think one of the reasons why I haven't seen much Stirling on my shelves recently is because half of his writing seems to run in long chains of up to 13 novels, and I'm not engaging for 13 novels. It doesn't seem necessarily like his books work as standalones. If I'm wrong, tell me that if his books work as standalones, because in one of his 13 long series, there is actually one that sounds pretty good. I don't know. I'm not going to read 11 other books to get to it though, so let me know. If you read it, if you loved it, let me know. Like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube variation stuff.